reports. Now, this afternoon, we have exclusive details from the Emolument Committee report as well. It was recommended that spouses of the president and his vice receive 100% salary of their current salaries if their partners served 2 or more terms. The salary level is at the figure of 30,644 cedis for the First Lady and 30,206 for the Second Lady as the wife of the Vice President. Now, these are recommendations that receive the blessing of Parliament. 2 suits have been filed against government seeking to block the payments to the spouses, despite government's explanation that it was Parliament that approved what had been recommended by the committee. My colleague Joseph Akable is joining me via Zoom with some details of this report. Joseph, run us through what specifically the committee found about the payment of these allowances to spouses of the president and the vice. You seem muted. Okay, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
So first, the committee noted that for some time, various amounts were paid, starting specifically made reference to the Kufuor era, but said that there was no legal basis for those payments to be made. And so it suggested that it should be regularized. That was the word that the committee used. And in doing so, the committee did indicate that it was important that they are put at certain levels. And so they should be treated as Article 71, not directly making reference to Article 71, but put them in the table that are provided for the executive and put them at various levels. And so that was the point that the committee had about the fact that, yes, the payments were being made from the Kufuor era. There was no legal base for those payments, but regularize them. And that said that there's a table below, follow the table and decide how each of them is supposed to be paid.
And so this table essentially provides the details. Let's talk about the specifics and what they are to receive. First, that of the First Lady, and then we go on to the wife of the Vice President.
Okay, so specifically for the spouse of the president, which is the First Lady, the recommendation was that there should be payment of a salary equivalent to Cabinet Minister MP as currently pertains. And as at the time the committee report was being prepared, that amount came to 33,270 cedis. Now, the recommendation comes in 2 ways. What it does is that it gives you a figure and tells you that should your partner serve 2 terms and leaves office, that figure now goes down. And so the starting point, and as of June 2020, the amount that was to be paid to the First Lady, since the husband was still in office, per the recommendations of the Emoluments Committee, is 33,270, while that of the Second Lady was pegged at 32,832. And with regards to what position she was placed on, payment of salary equivalent to a cabinet minister non-MP as currently pertains. And so that is how come we arrive at those figures. In terms of for the president and the vice, the president, the amount that was stated in this report as of June 2020 was 47,277, while that of the vice president was 39,397. And so we see the levels being that you have the president obviously taking more, the vice follows, then it comes to the First Lady and the Second Lady. But they are being pegged at the levels of cabinet minister MP, cabinet minister non-MP. Then if their partners leave office, it drops. So that is how come, that is it by way of the figures that were put out in this particular document.
Well, we also have a sense of what the committee recommended as the new salary level and how it should look like for the president and the vice, which is what you have taken us through. Is there anything else that we ought to share with our viewers, Joseph, as far as this document is concerned before we move on?
In fact, the concern that they raised was that they had realized that when previous committees, emolument committees that had been constituted, when they make recommendations, there tends to be an upward adjustment before it's eventually approved. And so they said that that's affected. And so that explained that even when they had made recommendations for the presidency, they ended up making adjustments for the vice president in some instances and led to a situation where there was just a 10-point difference. So what they do is that in the actual salary document, it's on point basis. And so the committee said that their suggestion was that the figures that they were recommending currently should not be tampered with by way of their points. And so as it stands now, the president, the amount that we mentioned, the 47,277, is actually at 120 award points. while that of the vice president is at 100 points. And that explanation that they gave was that they don't want anything to be tampered with, such that you'd have anyone moving close, because they believe that the president occupies an important role and should just be left at that particular level. Another very important recommendation that they made was that it is important for an independent emolument body of sorts to be established, because they said the manner in which it is carried out, they didn't believe that it was a sustainable way, neither does it address the concerns that springs up within this period. And so they thought that if it had been a tax that was handed to an independent body that was performing that tax specifically, that should be done. They also said that they do not expect that the adjustments are done in a manner that does not reflect the general increase in public service salary levels as well.
Joseph, thank you very much for the details of this particular document. Joseph Akablay there, who helped us to understand the details of the committee's recommendations. Now, I have governance expert Dr. Fred Ejakum Odro. He's joining me via Zoom, so we'll have a quick conversation on this. Doc, thank you very much. There have been concerns that have been raised. There are those who say this has no legal basis, but then this has gone through Parliament. So for those who are rejecting this on the basis of its legal basis, would you say their rejection or their criticisms are legitimate?
There may be some basis to what they are saying. And especially now that they've proceeded to court, I am very happy, because we need to get some of these issues sorted. This is something we've always had issues about for too long. But it is based on a constitutional provision that even this committee is set up. The committee is set up by law. It has to go through processes. Parliament and the presidency must approve these before they become implementable. So if there are questions being asked about legitimacy of the process, well, I'm happy we are going to court to resolve it once and for all, because we can't keep on having the situation every 4-year cycle. And I think let us have this resolved once and for all. But the question I ask myself is, this has been through Parliament and out for about 6 months now. Why are we now having this challenge today? I think we must bring some level of when we discuss such matters, we must be open about them. When it is hidden from the public view and decisions are made, and there is public backlash, we come to this sort of situation. So I would believe that some of these issues must be made public ahead of time for general debate and for consensus building before they are implemented. Otherwise, we kind of have this situation, and then there is this perception about scratch my back, you scratch my back, I scratch your back, between the Parliament and the executive. And it doesn't augur well for our democracy.
Talking about what augurs well for our democracy, let's look a little bit towards our governance. Now, what do you think are the implications for this entire discussion on our governance system? Let's begin with the payment of these amounts itself to spouses of the president and his vice. Are there any implications at all for governance? Is it a big deal? What is the problem in this?
Well, beyond the quantum of the amount being paid, I think it would have been a very good thing to establish in our democracy. One of the critical challenges with our democracy is corruption. And corruption comes about mostly because there is this view that if you are in office, amass wealth, hide it, so that when you are out of office, you can be catered adequately. Because if you look at our political history, we've had these overthrows, and we haven't had the sustainable democracy for a very long time. So everybody who goes into public office, especially at the highest level, the president and the vice, you have this fear that you could be booted out of power and there is nothing to sustain you and your family. For that purpose, I think if we are establishing a system that will ensure our former presidents, particularly, and their spouses, are looked after. I see nothing wrong with it.
Okay.
From purely gender perspective, there's this issue of, again, related to corruption and to even how we perceive our first ladies to be. If we have a first lady, or if we have a spouse of a president, should these people take up for profit jobs? Because whether we say yes or no, they come with their own implications. If the president's wife or husband must go out and work, whether in private sector or in public sector, there is the issue of conflict of interest. Because if the president's spouse is a consultant, for instance, can they go out there and take up a job with a public institution? I mean, take a government contract? These are questions we should ask ourselves. But if we also say the spouses of our president and their vice should not work, how should they be catered for? Should they live on the president's, the magnanimity of the president, their spouses, that if they need anything, they go to their husbands and request for them? These are critical issues we must answer. So we need to look at the fact that we don't want our political leaders, especially their spouses, to be destitute when they leave office, because we don't want them to take advantage of the system by taking government contracts or taking undue advantage of the system if they are working when their husbands or wives are in office. But then, when they also leave office, we should think that if they know they should go back to work, or they must find means to cater for themselves post their spouses holding office, there's also the challenge that they want to put something aside for that time. So let us make it a system that we cater for them when they are in office and out of office. They are looked after, and then they need not be greedy.
Let's jump
to
in there.
steal our monies.
Right. Well, let me just jump in there with this. So the point is, they are already being given allowances. For those who make the argument that this is unnecessary, they say they're already given allowances and that should be enough. And that if you want to pay them salaries at the level at which we are now, then it should take a referendum to change the constitution, because per the constitution, it's only Article 71 office holders who are supposed to earn, this much this way.
No, well, that is a view, but I am of the view that yes, it must be regularized. It is even the allowance, the so-called allowance they are being paid. It is not based on any law. It is not based on any legal arrangement. So if we want to pass a law to back that, so be it. But we need to have the discussion whether it is proper or it's not proper. So we must have cogent arguments to support or be against it.
Okay.
And then we must establish the legal framework to ensure that it will not be at the behest of anyone that today I want to pay, tomorrow I don't want to pay.
Okay.
And if it is being paid without any legal basis, that is also contrary to law. And we shouldn't encourage that.
Let me finally put in, this is my final question, talk about what implications there are for how long it has taken for this to come out, because the argument again has been that Parliament approved this, and so it's gone through the system already. Why are we now seeing this, and why are we now making noise about it? Are there, what does that say to you?
See, that's the transparency challenges we have in our democracy that we must speak against. Why is it coming up now and becoming a political issue? We've always had our opposition and I mean the majority and the minority side. Why haven't any of these sides brought this issue up for public discussion? I believe we can't keep on practicing our democracy this way. Transparency is a hallmark of good governance. So if we want to have a good democracy, we must ensure that some of these issues come up at the appropriate times for us to discuss, not when they are being implemented or after they've been implemented. During the design phase, we all should be aware for inputs to be made by all and sundry. That is what I find quite unacceptable about this whole process.
Doc, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Dr. Fred Ejako-Odro is a governance expert there helping us, to break this down. This issue of public discourse, we break it down to get the understanding. Thank you once again. Well, let's head to former President John Mahama, who's saying that attempts to sneak the spouses of president and vice into Article 71 office holder group is problematic. Well, here is a statement that you find on his website. It's a very long one, I must say, but in this first 3 paragraphs, he talks about the work that first ladies do, or the work that first and second ladies do, and the practice so far. And so I'm going to just move on from this background. And then he begins to talk about the distinction that ought to be made between allowances payable to spouses of the president, the vice president, former vice president, and former heads of state. He says that in the first government of the Fourth Republic, the Rawlings administration, during the Rawlings administration, some recommendations were made to provide allowances to the spouses of president and the vice. And additionally, as a gesture of reconciling with our past, the spouses of former president and heads of state were also given. Now, let me move again from this paragraph. Like I said, it's a very long write-up. So let's move on. He talks about, in this paragraph you see there, he talks about what has been happening, the raging issue that has generated what he called passionate debates among Ghanaians, both on social media and traditional media. That's when he begins to now address it specifically. He says that it has been in respect of a report confirmed by government that the spouses of President Akufo-Addo and the Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia are placed on a monthly salary at the level of a cabinet minister. He goes on, and I'm trying to move through quickly, so I give you the parts that talks about his disagreement. Now, he says that the news, particularly at this time of austerity, has generated some level of outrage among the populace. And he says, I can understand the anger of those opposing the recommendation of the Ntiamwa Bedu Committee and its subsequent approval of Parliament. And then he goes on to say it should be made clear also that the recommendation is in respect of spouses in the Ntiamwa Committee report, which covers the year January 7, 2017 to January 6, 2021. He says the challenge, however, is that the spouses of president and vice president are not captured among Article 71 office holders, and therefore there is no legal or constitutional basis for it. So the former president makes this argument as well about the constitutional basis for this. He goes on to say it should be noted that the recommended salaries for the spouses in the Ntiamwa Bedu report are captured as part of the emolument of the president and vice president. He goes on, this seems like an attempt to sneak the first and second ladies into the Article 71 office holder group. This is clearly problematic. So he quotes it, as you can see, and then he moves on. Then he has a question. He said the question then is, if the committee recognizes the above and therefore appreciate that there can be legal or constitutional, there can be no legal or constitutional basis for seeking to bestow such benefits on the spouses of the president and the vice, why then is it proceeding to provide for the payment of monthly salaries pegged at the level of cabinet minister to both of the spouses? Now take the final paragraph there. It says that, so he has more issues. Furthermore, he says, the pegging of their salaries at the level of cabinet minister suggests that all conditions and benefits that come with the committee's recommendation for a cabinet minister will apply to the spouses as well. This recommendation, therefore, is inappropriate, and its approval, if true, is unfortunate. Well, you can find the full statement on myjoyonline.com. We've posted it there. You can take your time and read. It's quite a lot, which is why I try to give you the highlight. Essentially, he says this is a ploy to sneak into sneak the spouses of the president and his vice into Article 71 office holders scheme, which means that their other conditions of service will apply to the spouses, he says it is inappropriate.